The car door slammed shut. In seconds, the powerful CEO was face to face with something he never expected. A little black girl, barely 9 years old, locked eyes with him, and before he could say a word, she cut him off. "Shut up." The words hit harder than any boardroom battle. This wasn't disrespect. This wasn't a joke. Her voice carried urgency, fear, and something else, truth. The driver froze. The air in the car grew tense. Why would a child, so small, speak with such force to a man who held the world in his hands? What did she know that he didn't? That single command was just the beginning. And when you hear the reason behind it, you'll realize this moment wasn't just shocking, it was life-changing. Her name was Maya. Just 9 years old, she carried a smile that could brighten even the roughest corners of her neighborhood. She lived with her mother in a small apartment, nothing fancy, but filled with love. Most afternoons, she could be found on the sidewalk with chalk in her hands, sketching crooked hopscotch squares and laughing with cousins. To anyone passing by, Maya looked like any other child, innocent, playful, full of dreams too big for her tiny frame. But beneath that laughter was a silence she rarely broke. She noticed things. She felt things. And sometimes she carried truths heavier than her small shoulders should ever bear. That day began like any other. The sun was dipping low, painting the streets gold as Maya and her mother headed out. A car rolled to a stop nearby, its door opening with a quiet wait. Inside sat a man used to being obeyed, listened to, respected without question. A man who thought he understood the world because money had shielded him from its hardest edges. When their paths crossed, it seemed like chance. Just another moment in an ordinary day. But for Maya, this was no ordinary moment. She had seen something she couldn't ignore. And when the man stepped inside, thinking he was in control, Maya's small voice would shatter the silence in a way that neither of them would ever forget. The moment Maya's words cut through the air, the car seemed to freeze. The CEO's polished confidence cracked, just for a second. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way, especially not by a child. Especially not by this child. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, sharp, certain, as though silence itself was dangerous. The driver glanced nervously into the rearview mirror, unsure if he should intervene. The CEO leaned back, folding his arms, trying to mask his discomfort with a cold smirk. "Do you know who I am?" he thought. But Maya didn't flinch. She wasn't impressed by wealth, or power, or the kind of man who lived in glass towers. She was staring at him with the eyes of someone who had seen too much, too young. And then she explained. Just days before, Maya and her mother had walked past the same street where his company's offices loomed over the neighborhood. They were stopped, not by security, not by police, but by men in crisp suits with clipboards in hand. Men who worked for him. The CEO. They spoke to her mother like she was invisible, as if her presence was an inconvenience. They demanded proof of residence, as though simply walking near the building made her suspicious. They didn't see a hardworking woman escorting her child home, they saw a threat. Maya remembered how her mother's voice shook, how she fumbled with her worn ID card. How the men's eyes narrowed, scanning it as if hunting for a flaw. She remembered standing there, gripping her mother's hand, wishing she could be invisible. Wishing the world didn't always treat them like they didn't belong. But it didn't stop there. When her mother asked why she was being questioned, one of the men sneered. He told her people like her caused problems around the building, too much noise, too many complaints. He didn't use ugly words, but Maya had learned early on, you don't always need slurs to feel the sting of racism. Sometimes it's in the tone, in the eyes, in the assumption that you are guilty just for existing where someone thinks you shouldn't be. The CEO shifted uncomfortably as Maya recounted every detail. He wanted to brush it off. Surely it was a misunderstanding. Surely his people wouldn't do something like that. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was easier for him not to see it. Easier to focus on numbers, profits, growth, while turning a blind eye to the way his empire touched lives like hers. And then Maya told him why she had spoken up in the car. Earlier that day, She had spotted those same men near their street. She had seen the way they looked at her mother again, following, watching. And when she noticed the CEO step into the car, she realized this was the man behind it all. This was the man who could stop it, if only he chose to listen. Her words grew heavier, her small voice trembling now with urgency. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're hurting us. And nobody believes us. Nobody listens." The CEO tried to respond, but every time he opened his mouth, Maya shut him down. "No. You need to hear this." The car that once felt like his domain now belonged to her. Her truth filled every corner. The driver shifted again, clearly uneasy, as if the air itself was too heavy to breathe. The CEO felt something he hadn't felt in years: helplessness. He was a man used to commanding respect, moving markets, changing lives with the stroke of a pen. But now, he sat powerless before a child who refused to be silenced. And just when he thought she had finished, Maya delivered the blow that shattered him. She told him about her friend, another little black girl, same age, same street, who had been taken aside weeks before, accused of stealing candy near one of his stores. Security had dragged her away in front of everyone. No apology, no correction, even when it turned out she had bought it fair and square. The shame never left her. And Maya had watched. She had learned that day what silence cost. Her eyes burned into his. "That's why I told you to shut up," she said. "Because you don't know what it feels like to never be heard. But you're going to hear me now." The car rolled on in silence, but inside, the storm only grew stronger. The CEO could feel the weight of every word pressing down on him, forcing him to confront a truth he had ignored for too long. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The car slowed at a red light, but inside, the tension didn't stop building. Maya's small hands were clenched tight, her voice shaking but fierce. The CEO sat frozen, the weight of her words pressing on him harder than any boardroom decision ever had. For the first time in his life, someone wasn't afraid to cut him down to silence. And the sting was sharper because it came from a child who shouldn't have known this kind of pain at all. Then it happened. The men in suits, the very ones Maya had warned him about, were waiting on the corner. Clipboards in hand, cold eyes scanning the street. The CEO's pulse quickened. He recognized them instantly. His men. His employees. But to Maya, they weren't just workers. They were the ones who had followed her mother, who had made her friend cry, who had treated their existence like a crime. Maya's breath caught. "That's them," she whispered. "The ones I told you about." The light turned green. The car rolled forward. And just like that, one of the men stepped out, raising a hand to stop them. The driver hesitated, looking back at the CEO for instruction. For years, the CEO had thrived on authority. His nods and handshakes could move millions. But now, with Maya's trembling voice echoing in his ears, he couldn't ignore what was unfolding before him. The men didn't look at him first. They looked at Maya's mother, walking just a few steps behind the car. Their tone was sharp, commanding, already treating her like a suspect. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." The CEO opened his mouth, ready to excuse it as protocol. But then he saw it. The way Maya's mother froze, clutching her bag tighter, her shoulders tense with a fear he had never known. The fear of being humiliated again. The fear of being powerless. And then came the breaking point. One of the men reached for her arm. Not roughly, but firm enough to strip away her dignity in public daylight. Maya screamed from inside the car. "Leave her alone!" Her small fists pounded against the window, her face pressed against the glass. The sound pierced the CEO like nothing ever had. He saw it all clearly now, the cycle of silence, of turning away, of letting policy excuse cruelty. And for the first time in his life, he understood the cost of his silence. His company's silence. His world's silence. The crowd around the corner started to notice. Phones came out. Eyes turned. The humiliation that Maya's mother lived in fear of was unfolding right there, in front of everyone. The CEO's chest burned with a new kind of panic. Not the panic of losing a deal or slipping stocks, but the panic of finally seeing the truth and knowing he had been complicit all along. He slammed his hand against the seat in front of him. "Stop the car." The driver froze. The men outside froze. Even Maya stopped pounding the glass, her eyes wide. For a moment, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The CEO stepped out. His suit immaculate, his shoes polished, his very presence commanding attention. The men recognized him instantly, their faces paling as if they'd seen a ghost. They hadn't expected him. Not here. Not now. And yet, instead of nodding in approval or offering an easy out, he raised his voice, sharper, louder than Maya had ever managed. "Let her go." The street fell silent. The men released Maya's mother instantly, stumbling over apologies. But the damage had been done. The fear in her eyes, the tears in Maya's, none of it could be erased. The CEO stood there, trembling in a way he had never admitted to himself. For the first time in his life, he realized his title, his money, his power, none of it meant anything if he stayed silent in the face of injustice. Maya stepped out of the car and grabbed her mother's hand. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with a challenge as she looked up at him. "Now do you understand?" The question cut deeper than any insult ever could. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who chose silence when they should have spoken. The CEO's chest heaved. Around him, a crowd was forming. Cameras were pointed. The whole world was watching. And in that moment he knew he could walk away, protect his image, dismiss it as nothing, or he could finally face the truth. What he chose next would change everything. The street eventually cleared, but the moment would never leave them. The men who had once stood so tall with authority now backed away in shame, their clipboards suddenly worthless in their hands. The CEO remained standing in the middle of it all, his voice still echoing in his own ears. Let her go. For Maya and her mother, it was a rare victory. No security guard's grip, no unjust questioning, no humiliation carried home that day. But the victory was bittersweet. Because they knew this wasn't the first time, and it would not be the last. Maya clung to her mother's side, her small fingers wrapped tightly around the woman who had carried her through so many storms. She glanced at the CEO, her young eyes still fierce, still unafraid. He had power, so much power. But now he had no excuse. She had told him the truth, shown him what silence costs. The question was, would he do something with it? The CEO climbed back into the car, his reflection in the tinted glass no longer familiar. For years he had prided himself on success, on building an empire. But what was the value of an empire if it trampled the very people it claimed to serve? Maya's words echoed again in his mind. Now do you understand? And the truth was, he did. He finally did. In the days that followed, his world looked different. Meetings with executives felt hollow, profits and projections rang empty. He could no longer walk past his own offices without hearing Maya's trembling voice, without remembering the fear in her mother's eyes. For the first time, he realized that racism wasn't just something that happened out there. It was in his company, in his policies, in his silence. But Maya, just 9 years old, had done what so many adults could not. She forced him to listen. She forced him to see. Her act of courage became his turning point. And though change would not come overnight, those systems of injustice are far bigger than one man. It began with a choice, to no longer ignore, to no longer excuse, to no longer stay silent. And that's the part of Maya's story that matters most. Because she represents countless children, countless families, who live this reality every single day. Families who are watched, followed, questioned, doubted, humiliated, not because of what they've done, but because of the color of their skin. This story isn't fiction. It's a reflection of the truth too many choose to look away from. How many more times must a mother grip her ID card with shaking hands? How many more children must learn to shout just to be heard? How many more moments must be caught on phones before the world finally says, enough? The CEO will never forget that day. Not because he was embarrassed, not because he was challenged, but because a little girl's voice cut through the noise of power and pride and revealed what silence really costs. And maybe that's what we all need to hear. Because the question isn't just what he did next, it's what we will do. Will we keep walking past injustice, pretending it doesn't touch us? Or will we, like Maya, find the courage to speak up even when the world tells us to stay quiet? The answer will shape more than one company, more than one street corner. It will shape the future. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, when silence feels easier than truth, will you stay quiet? Or will you finally speak?